Good morning and welcome to Bolton. My name's Josh Kelly. I'm the brand new town administrator here, and I will be your host today. There are live shows that are broadcast on the first and third Tuesdays of each month from 10:30 to 11 a.m., and those are respectively rebroadcast on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month at the same time. This show is a continuing effort to promote open communications in the community, and if you have ideas for future shows, please call or email me at Town Hall. Today, we have two very special guests here, and we're here to talk about September being Suicide Prevention Month. This is a difficult conversation at times to have, but today we want to focus on hope and healing and hopefully give you information that you need to help support yourself and to help support others around you and in the community. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that this serves as a bit of a helping process for everybody involved. So thank you very much for being here. I'm joined today by Ann Daigle, who's the Executive Director and President of the Brian Daigle Foundation down in Niantic, Connecticut, and Tom Steen of Steen Consulting, as well as the state's Suicide Advisory Board. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So could you tell me a little bit about yourselves and your current professional roles? I don't know if you want to start with Tom and we can
I'll
go
let
to
Tom
Ann
go
next.
first.
Oh, thank you, Ann. I'm a Simsbury resident. My bride of 40 years. I lived there the past 15 years, raised 3 sons. Retired YMCA director, used to run the Indian Valley YMCA. Blast of the past. Got into suicide prevention training. I want to say by accident. I lost a son to suicide about 10 years ago, my son Tyler. He was 21, attending college, and they're just, after taking early retirement from the Y, it's like, I got to get back into the game and try to do something about mental health promotion, substance abuse prevention, and not thinking in a million years is here I am doing training. I was in East Lyme High School yesterday doing suicide prevention training. I'll go anywhere, any place to help people understand what warning signs and risk factors are when somebody is struggling, and what really to do with that information when your gut's telling you somebody's in trouble, how to connect them to the right professional help so that we can save lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Ann?
So I am an East Lyme resident, been there for about 20 years, raised 3 sons there as well. 2011, I lost my son, Brian, to suicide. Before losing Brian, I was in the health and fitness field, promoting people to get healthy with their bodies. Now I hope to say that I help people get healthy with their hearts, or help them heal their hearts. So I have the Brian Daigle Foundation, along with Brian's Healing Hearts Center for Hope and Healing, where we offer grief support, not only for survivors of suicide loss, but we have grief programs for any loss. We have several groups for loss of a spouse. We have groups for a loss of a child, and we have groups to help people understand the grief journey and where they're going. So we have several groups for that, along with meditation programs and anything to help people in their healing process. So along with our grief support work, we do suicide prevention work. As with Tom, I'm a colleague with him on the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and also the Connecticut chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So we've both taken this work, I think, to a different level, a passion that is deep within us that helps us not only with our healing, but I think, as you said at the beginning of the show, that we can offer hope for people that somehow we can't give them the answers, but somehow they will make it through.
Absolutely. Now, you both mentioned a few different organizations, and Ann, you really touched on some of the work that the Brian Daigle Foundation does. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot more to that, but you've also now mentioned the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the State Suicide Advisory Board. Can you tell me a little bit more about, on a routine basis, what are those organizations doing?
Well, Tom is actually, he's a former chair of the Connecticut chapter for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, so I'll let him refer to that a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, our work with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which is the leading organization in our country, it provides millions and millions of dollars in research in the whole scheme of suicide and suicide loss, suicide prevention. Got involved here about 6 years ago. There's always been a southern chapter in Connecticut, but never a northern chapter, or not covering the northern part of the state. So myself, Ann, and a handful of other people got together with the folks from the AFSP national office, and we formed a northern chapter. After about a couple years, the powers to be and all of us kind of sat down and said, wouldn't it be better that we have one chapter? So about a year and a half ago, we merged. We merged the two chapters into one. And my the chair of the southern chapter and myself kind of were the co-chairs in this past year and a half. I've recently stepped out of that co-chair position to really focus more on what my passion is with AFSP, which is to, really do the development, the education, and the community outreach that AFSP offers throughout Connecticut. And how we do that is through our AFSP walks. Half the money raised at this walk stay here in Connecticut to support those kind of programs. So I'm really kind of excited about it. And more importantly with the walks, it's people on the same journey as Ann and I that can come together every year and heal together and support each other. So it's really a really positive dual purpose. And I think as Connecticut chapter becomes more and more involved, and we're a part of the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board, which is the statewide organization, and partnering with them so that that we can spread the message and be sure that we're reaching out to all corners of the state when it comes to not only suicide prevention, but grief support, which is so important.
Absolutely. And we can talk a little bit more about resources and about events later, but I did want to note that I had the chance to attend the first walk this past weekend, and I know I saw Ann there in Niantic, and there will be two more coming up in the very immediate future right here in the northeast corner, one in Woodstock and one in Hartford.
Yeah, this week, this Sunday will be the Woodstock walk at the South Campus, Woodstock Campus in Woodstock, Connecticut. And then the Hartford Walk is Saturday the 28th, and it's on the East Hartford side. It's the Great East River Park there. If you go to afsp.org/walks and click on Connecticut, you can get all the information you need on not only those two walks, but the walks coming up in the remaining 3 walks that are happening later on in the fall.
Perfect. As you've both noted already, unfortunately, it's often a personal loss that leads folks to become more aware of and more active with suicide prevention efforts. Could you tell us a little more? How did you get involved? What did that take, and how were you able to grapple with that a little bit personally?
So for me, in my experience, my first walk was actually at UConn 8 years ago. I knew nothing about the walks, knew nothing about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. As a survivor of suicide loss, you feel so isolated and struggling, and back then, it was really not talked about. I mean, even though it will be 8 years for me in November since I lost my son, there was very little support for people. I found the walk through my son's friends, who organized a wonderful team of all his friends to walk. So it was there that I was introduced to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. From there, I got connected to other survivors of suicide loss, and there are so many of us out there, we become a family. So it was through those people that I found other resources, such as the Suicide Advisory Board in Connecticut, and then that just kind of steamrolled into other places to help find support. I did find a survivor of suicide loss support group, actually in Colchester, but it was the only one that I could find. So for myself, after a period of time when I started to come out of the darkness, as we say in the Out of the Darkness walks, come out of the darkness, I said, I need to do something. So that I felt that I needed I was at a place that I could reach out to others to know that they weren't alone. So I went through my own series of trainings to be able to help people in their grief support, and one was to facilitate a support group. So I have a group that I have been facilitating for over 5 years for survivors of suicide loss. So, and then it just steamrolled. You know, I used to travel to Massachusetts twice a month because that's where I found a really great support system there. And it was at this wonderful center. And at some point I said, you know, we need a center like that in Connecticut. And so that's where Brian's Healing Hearts came to be. So I just want people to know wherever they are in their grief, however their loss is or whoever they lost, that they're not alone, and to find connection. You know, I see that more and more, that as humans, through any walks of life, through any issues in life, whether it's a tragedy or a celebration, we want to be connected to others who understand. And so that's where the support groups and that's where my work came into play.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing. Tom, would you like to say a few?
Very similar story as Anne and her husband Paul. My son passed while attending college in Savannah, Georgia, and we had no clue he was in trouble. We thought everything was just fine. But after he died, we began to pull away the layers of what was going on in this young man's life. He was in real trouble. And what I learned from, and what helped me to heal, and it took about 2 years for me to come around to be able to publicly talk about Tyler's death, is, and really his life, because his life was great, that there were warning signs, there were risk factors and warning signs. And so as I began to learn, I had to come to grips with that, because when you lose somebody that's tragically, the first thing you do is you blame yourself. Mm-hmm. And learning that that's really not the case, and trying to find your way over to the other side to accepting that it wasn't your fault, it was really key for me. And it came from prevention. How do I educate people to not have to go through the same thing I did? And my family, and all his 2 surviving brothers, my wife and I, we all healed differently. So it was kind of unique. We reached out to support groups, but Anne is so right. 10 years ago, there was nothing to help with a loss. And you know, and thank God we can do better, mm-hmm. But we're getting there, and as far as our reach to being able to support, and the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board has been playing a significant role in that case, and I think I'm proud of Connecticut. I think we've really done some really good work when it comes to, you know, educating people about what the risk factors and the warning signs is. And then when somebody is in trouble, what do you do with that information? How do you connect them to helps? And, you know, and that's grassroots stuff. It really, truly is. And then hopefully all communities at some point will embrace, talk about suicide. Don't be afraid of the stigma. You know, mental health and physical health are just as important to each other. And if you don't have mental health, you can't have physical, and vice versa. So getting that understanding across all of our communities in Connecticut will help. And I think we'll see a dramatic reduction in suicide at some point, if we can get there. And that's our challenge.
First and foremost, thank you for sharing. And I agree that even in the past 6 years, from mm-hmm. kind of when I really started to focus on issues surrounding suicide and looking forward, there's a lot more going on for folks. And there are many more opportunities Absolutely. For folks to be able to seek that help, but also for attention to kind of be given and for people to pull them in and try and get them connected with help. So that's really thanks to folks on the ground, just like both of you. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Now, what can you tell us about current trends in the area, and what do these statewide trends potentially mean for small towns like Bolton?
Yeah, I think there's, I provided some data slides. The first one is the Connecticut data slide that from AFSP, our friends from AFSP, oh yeah, there it is on the screen. And there's some interesting information. We lose somebody to suicide every day in Connecticut, reported suicide. And that doesn't include, like in my son's case, he was in Georgia when he died. He wouldn't be included in any of this data. So it's really just Connecticut data. And I think, and for every death there's 25 attempts. So when you think about that, wow, talk about a public health issue here, and no one's talking about it. The other thing, and I use the scenario of, it's called a ripple effect, but a lot of people use that, and so I try not to. But I use the analogy: if you recall a summer morning where a lake that you're in front of is like a piece of glass, and you throw the pebble into the lake, the waves are really big at the beginning. That's what happens when somebody dies by suicide. The people that are impacted. And they say on average, about 115 people within that person's sphere of life are dramatically impacted. But it's the other rings. It's the community, it's the school, it's the faith-based community. And for a town like Bolton, that's what happens. And so it just, folks, when there's a youth suicide, they say, oh, it's a school problem. No, suicide is a community problem, and everybody should kind of tie arms together to help to prevent and plan so if that does occur, that the community acts appropriately and supports. So that's really what that slide says. We're also like 45th, 46th in the country as far as suicide loss rate. And there's really a reason for that. And the key reason is, residents in Connecticut can get to a hospital within 15 and 20 minutes when there's a major medical emergency. Think about if you lived in Montana, how long you would get probably an hour and a half. And we know that most women attempt more. It's kind of 1/3 to 2/3, and they tend to use overdose or poisoning. So if that occurred, you can get to a hospital and you can reverse it pretty quick. Men don't attempt as much, but they die more, and that's because they use lethal means. So when we educate folks, when somebody's at risk, you want to put protective factors around them, and some of those protective factors is connecting them to professional help. It's so important. Get a lot of people around them that can create like a safety net for to keep them safe, and then to remove any lethal means that person might have access to, and in the goal to keep people safe. So I always use that in the trainings I do when I look at the data, because we're good. We're like 45th, 46th as rate in the country, but one suicide is one too many. I'm sure I'd love to see a 0 there someday.
Absolutely. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately. I know last week there was a symposium on suicide prevention that a lot of members of various communities around the state were able to attend to, around the concept of postvention.
Yes.
Could you both tell me a little bit about what that means and how it might relate to events that might happen here in this community or other communities right around Bolton?
So I know Tom and I feel very strongly that postvention is the best prevention you can have, because when you lose someone to suicide, you're at risk for considering suicide yourself. It's just unfortunately a fact. So the more support that we can give somebody after the loss, the more important we can support someone or a community, as Tom referred to. It's not just the immediate family, it goes out to the schools, to the town leaders, to, in my situation, it was the cafeteria ladies. Everybody is affected by this loss. And again, my son had been out of school. He had been away at college as well. But still, it was a couple years afterwards. But the loss is just as deep and as strong. So it's important that we support that community and have the proper response. And we talk about it in a safe way that is not going to harm anybody or trigger anyone to consider anything else. So there's a lot of work that goes involved in the postvention. As you saw at that symposium, we created that scenario with all those 10 people that you would never even think about. Faith leaders, police officers, all boyfriends of a relative. So it goes on and on and on. So it's really important that we work on this postvention. And postvention is not just in the days and the weeks after, it goes on for years. And that's an important thing as survivors that we need to get across to people, is some people are not able to face their loss for a couple years, you know. So they have that delayed grief. And so it might not be until 1 or 2 years that they can even admit that they lost a loved one to suicide. So after, many years after, still a lot of postvention work needs to be done.
To add to that, postvention comes in kind of 2 categories, as we learned at the symposium. First, there's postvention planning. In my work with 30, 40 towns here in the past 6, 7 years, I can tell you that there's no advanced planning. So when a death occurs, it's a scramble, and people do their best when there's a tragedy like this. But I've been, from a postvention perspective, really banging the drum hard on planning, sitting down, and not just the school, but all the different community sectors out there, to sit down and even if it's just for 3 hours, to say, okay, when there is a death by suicide, how are we going to all handle it? How are we going to all keep people safe? And how are we going to then do grief support and making sure the families are well supported through that loss. So planning is important. And the second part is the response. And that's kind of what Ann just shared with you is, okay, a death occurs, what's the response? And how do we best handle it? So getting community leaders like yourself, Josh, to begin to think about this in kind of a more holistic way, I think will not only prevent suicide, but when and if it does occur, that we keep our community safe.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So you just had the chance to touch a little bit on, and of course, what I'm perhaps most interested in discussing myself is what can towns and what can, really these smaller communities do to help engage in the postvention process and the planning behind that. But also, I know that there is a lot going on at the state. Can you tell me a little bit about what or a lot going on at the state level, but not necessarily with the state government? Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what kind of aid those different agencies and groups and organizations are able to give to towns like Bolton?
Yeah, my first recommendation, and jump in, Ann, is that they sign up, go to preventsuicidect.org and sign up for their, it's another listserv or email list that maybe you don't want to, as a public official or as a concerned citizen, have on your browser. But that is the depository of all information, all that is happening here in Connecticut when it comes to suicide prevention, postvention, and grief support. So the resources are just unlimited. The advisory board meets once a month on the second Thursday, and you would be astounded. I mean, there are multiple state agencies represented, multiple foundations, concerned citizens, loss survivors, people with lived experience. We haven't talked about those folks today, but that's somebody who has attempted and has survived their attempt. And we learn so much from those folks when they do share their story. So do get connected to the preventsuicidect.org.
The meeting agenda is always on there, so I would advise people just kind of look through the monthly agendas and to see if something resonates with them. We always have a speaker every month, and then you can always pull up after the speaker the PowerPoint and the presentation that they had. So as Tom said, there's amazing resources on there for prevention, for postvention, for communities like Bolton to find out what they need to do. And I think the important thing also is talking about it, right? By you starting this conversation today, Josh, here in your town, is how we reduce the stigma, is how we do our prevention work, by saying that it's okay to look for help, it's okay to reach out to somebody, and to get educated yourself, so allowing yourself to learn. As with Tom said, with myself, I had no idea about suicide. That word was not in my world. And if I had known then what I know now, perhaps I wouldn't be sitting here today. So educating yourself and your community is the best thing that you can do.
Absolutely. And I know down in East Lyme, there will be a forum coming up, a
Yes.
community forum that's really going to hope to try to facilitate some of those more difficult conversations. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and other maybe events that you've seen other towns hold that have been really useful and constructive?
Again, the forum we've had it every year since losing my son, and it is a conversation to have with our community leaders, with our students, with our parents, with our concerned citizens. And each year we try and have a theme. This year we're trying to focus on the young adults, to get the young adults out there, and we'll have a panel of speakers to speak. We have our state representatives come. Holly Cheeseman will be there. Probably we're hoping Senator Paul Formica will be there attending as well, just to give their support behind us and again to have the conversation going.
Absolutely. Now, we've addressed a couple different resources in the past few minutes and over the course of this program, but are there other points of contact that you'd really like to let our viewers know about, other opportunities or resources where they can get connected if they need help or if maybe they know somebody who they think might be in need of help?
I think the suicide prevention hotline number is a perfect number for them to have, the 1-800-273-TALK. Or they have a text line where you text 741-741, and someone on the other end will respond to you. So I give those out to everyone. Also in Connecticut, we have our 211 number. So those are perfect resources. Again, AFSP.org has unlimited resources. Our Prevent Suicide CT. .org organization has resources. Tom, can you think of anything else?
The only one I would add to it is, as I've gone across the state educating people in suicide prevention work, it's, what do you do when you're at home, it's 9 o'clock at night, and you're really worried about a loved one or you're worried about yourself? Call 211. They 24/7, they have a social worker. And you press 1 and then 1 again, and you get the social worker, and they, I know I've done a lot of training with them. They're very helpful, especially if a parent is worried about a child, or a family member or a friend is worried about another family or friend. It's just a really good place to talk, get some ideas, get some information. We shared stuff here today that you can use, but 6 months from now, when you're really worried about somebody, where do you go? And so I say use 211.
Absolutely.
Connecticut is blessed to have it, and it's not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's a great go-to place to get the information you need, especially when you think somebody's at risk.
Excellent. Thank you both again for being here today and for helping this town continue its own conversation as it moves forward. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I do want to share just a couple quick things with our viewers today. This week, we do have a Board of Finance meeting this coming Thursday, September 19th at 7 p.m. at Town Hall. The Fire Commission will meet on Monday, September 23rd, and Inland Wetland and Economic Development Commissions meet on Tuesday of next week, the 24th, and the 300th Committee will meet on Wednesday, September 25th. The Board of Selectmen have their public hearing on our blight ordinance coming up tomorrow at September 18th at 7 p.m. And anyone who's interested is welcome to come down and speak to the Board of Selectmen about their thoughts on the matter. Our next show will be on October 1st. We'll be joined by Bolton's building official and fire marshal to discuss fire prevention and safety. And again, I really want to thank both Ann and Tom here for being with us today. If you want to continue the conversation in our community and you want to see what the town can do to get involved in these efforts, please feel free to reach out to me at Town Hall. And please do remember these resources, 211, and for texting 741-741. They're instrumental and they could help you or someone you know. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next time.